All right, my friends, it is now time for the Soulful Psalms segment of Beacon of Truth. This is the part of the show where we take one of the Psalms from the wisdom literature of the Old Testament, uh, the hymnal for our Jewish brothers and sisters, which we also use in each and every holy sacrifice of the Mass, and we connect that Psalm to your everyday lived experience. And the great thing about the Soulful Psalms is that it's its own podcast. That's right. You can go to Podcast Central on the EWTN website or download, as I do, the EWTN app. A lot of great content on there, including the Soulful Psalms. Or even you can go to one of your favorite podcast platforms like SoundCloud or iTunes or Spotify to listen to the Soulful Psalms each and every day. And I'm using the Revised Grail Psalms. This is the version of Psalms that's been approved by the U.S. bishops for use in the Holy Sacrifice of the Mass, and it was prepared by the Benedictine monks of Conception Abbey. So if you're using a different translation, that's fine. Whatever translation you're using, follow along with us. Today, we're continuing our look at Psalm 74. So Psalm 74 is in Book 3 of the Psalms, Psalm 73 to 89. Psalm 73 to 83 are by Asaph. So Asaph means gather in Hebrew. So we're going to pick up at verse 16, but the prescript or superscript of the psalm simply says Maskil ha-Asaph, or a maskil of Asaph. So maskil means enlightened one or scholar. That's what it means now. But again, we're not 100% sure what these words that are used in this prescript or superscript meant back at the time that these psalms were written. All right. So again, we're diving in at verse 16, Psalm 74:16. Yours is the day, and yours is the night. It was you who established the light and the sun. So what Asaph is doing here, he's going back and recalling how God has worked in human history, how God has worked in the life of the people of Israel. Because sometimes the people of Israel have forgotten, that the Lord was their God and that the God is there to provide for them and to love them. And so sometimes they get a little bit too comfortable, they get a little bit too arrogant, and they move away from the worship of God and start to listen to their own voices or listen to the pagan cultures around them. And so Asaph is reminding the people, hey, wait a second, don't forget that the Lord is our God. And so, and as a way of reminding them, he reminds them of God's omnipotence and God's power and glory. So the Lord, yours is the day and yours is the night. You establish the light and the sun. Now, again, you establish the light and the sun. Well, of course, if there's going to be sun, there's going to be light. But remember, back in the book of Genesis, God created light. Remember, he separated the light from the darkness, right? And that was on day 1, but the sun wasn't created until day 4, right? So what's going on there? Well, the light is heaven, right? The light is heaven. So we separate the darkness from the light. That is when Satan and the demons were exorcizo, were cast out from heaven to earth. We see that depicted very clearly in Revelation chapter 12, where Saint Michael, the archangel, and the other archangels got into a battle with Satan and his demons, and they were cast out to earth. And so that's why it says the light and then the sun as separate, right? So the light and then the sun. It was you who fixed the bounds of the earth, you who made both summer and winter, right? So to remind them of God's power. Look, you may think you're going through something hard right now and God is not with you, but look around. You can see within nature the light, the darkness, the movement of the sun throughout the day, the seasons that change. So there are things that happen in your life that change. Maybe you change your perspective on how you think about God, how you think about God working in your life. But when you look around at nature, there are things that God created that don't change, right? The seasons don't change. the way that God has fixed the bounds of the earth. So, in other words, the water only goes to a certain point and then the land takes over from there. Gravity, the birds and, and all of that. God creates all of that. God is the Lord of all of that. And so again, one thing that we can do to have confidence is look around at nature and see how powerful, how awesome God is, and take confidence in the fact that if God can do that within the forces of nature, He has control over all of that. How much more personally He wants to be involved in our lives. He created us not like the rest of nature. We are made in His image and likeness. So we are called to reflect God's life, right? And so we're, in fact, He, in Genesis 1, He put us in charge of all of creation, right? To be caretakers and custodians of the powerful forces and things on the earth that He's given us, right? So we're stewards of God's creation. So we participate in God's creative life. So I think this is a beautiful reminder. And sometimes, we just need to do that. We need to appreciate the power and the beauty of us, the summer and winter, the change of the seasons. Although, part of the change of the seasons is daylight savings time, which I don't like. I mean, I just wish they would just stop changing the clocks and be done with it, you know? But again, just a powerful reminder of God's beauty working in nature and also working in our lives.
Yeah, and think about it like when you're at the beginning of spring, right? You still got maybe brown grass and, mulch is kind of, shredded all over the place from just a, crazy winter or bad storm. And then you have that one little flower that's just sprung up in the middle of, your yard or middle of, your flower bed. And I love that because my wife was great at like pointing out, she's like, did you see the bud in our yard? And I love her excitement on that because what's cool is it's a reminder of what's the one little bud in our life that we can look forward to watching to grow into the full garden. What are we doing as seeds to then allow to be watered and fertilized properly so that we can grow? And then again, think about when you live, I mean, this from living in the Seattle area, and I know from being in the South, the weather is the same every year. You might get those surprise seasons that things might happen a little wonky. You might be too cold or too rainy or a little snow or whatever. But you pretty much know what's going to happen because you've been there. And that's what happens when we spend time with God, to find that place that clears out the clutter, to go, I know Him for doing these things because I've seen it. And every season or every time there's something new in my life, this has always been the order. So allowing that bud to then have room to grow into our lives to remind us of the next time, the new bud, what that means for the future.
Yeah, exactly. In fact, what does St. Paul say? I seeded, Apollos watered, God gave the yield, right?
Yeah.
And so God plants that seed of faith in our hearts. But it's interesting because sometimes people's hearts are rocky, right? So they're sandy. Like the parable of the sower. Some seeds landed on rocky soil, sandy soil, thorny soil. The weeds came and choked it. The birds came and ate it, and some fell on good soil. So what we have to do is continue to prepare our lives, our hearts, to receive that seed.
Yeah.
And sometimes, our hearts are a little rocky, or sometimes the weeds come up and kind of choke that seed that we're beginning to grow in our faith. All of a sudden, something comes and just kills that faith.
Yeah.
But we have to just continue to allow that seed of faith to grow, water, sunlight, fertilizer, and allow God to continue to work in our lives to grow that beautiful bud of faith that will sprout into something absolutely beautiful in our lives.
Yeah, amen. And I also too will say, what is the thing, talking about clearing out the clutter? What is the thing that helps you to clear out the voices of the world, the voices in our heads, anything that would make the agenda of the world or the enemy play any kind of seed into our lives, right? And so, for me, music's a great one. I know for you, silence, adoration is big, and I know finding what that is that's best for you based on your makeup and how God created you is kind of like the workout that's unique to your body. What is the thing that helps to clear the clutter so that nothing's getting in the way or the wrong things being seeded into our lives?
Yeah, exactly. because Jesus talks about separating the wheat from the chaff.
Right.
So sometimes, although he does say that, he talked about that one parable where the weeds and the wheat were growing together, and and Jesus said, "Let them."
Yeah.
I was like, whoa, wait a minute, because you're supposed to go out and weed the garden, remove all that stuff.
Right.
But he said something, allow them to both grow together. So in other words, there's going to be weeds in our lives.
Right.
So what we have to we just have to be aware of that fact. There are going to be weeds in our lives, and sometimes they're going to grow up together with us. We cannot allow those weeds to control us and to move our minds and hearts away from God.
Amen.
Beautiful.
For more on the Soulful Psalms with Deacon Harold Sivers, check out Beacon of Truth weekdays at 4 p.m. Eastern on EWTN Radio and streaming everywhere you listen to podcasts.